She is a mother who did the unthinkable, and in doing so, becomes the embodiment of remorse. Her endless wandering is not punishment alone, it is grief without closure. Psychologists describe this as the eternal cycle of loss, the inability to accept tragedy, forcing the mind to replay it endlessly. In La Llorona, that repetition becomes physical, a spirit doomed to relive her mistake, night after night. Her cries remind us of our own regrets, the words left unsaid, the choices we wish we could undo. And perhaps that is why her legend strikes such a deep chord. Because all humans, in some form, carry ghosts of their own making. Beyond guilt, there is another emotion that fuels her legend: loss. La Llorona is the embodiment of absence. Her children are gone. Her love is gone. Her life is gone. Yet she cannot stop searching. In psychology, this mirrors the phenomenon of haunting grief, a state where the mourner is unable to move on, forever seeking what can never return. Children hearing her story learn to fear water and disobedience. But adults, hearing it again, fear something else, that they too might one day lose what they love most and be left alone with nothing but memory. La Llorona's cry becomes an emotional mirror. It reflects back the pain of everyone who listens. Psychologists studying folklore describe La Llorona as an archetype of cultural trauma, a story that carries the unhealed wounds of history. In Latin America, her legend emerged from centuries of conquest, colonization, and forced assimilation. Entire cultures lost their languages, families, and lands. And so, in her voice, crying endlessly for her lost children, people heard their own loss echoed back to them. La Llorona is not just one woman's pain. She is the personification of a continent's sorrow, the voice of the colonized, crying for generations gone. Her story became a way for communities to remember, to give shape to emotions too deep for words. It was not just a ghost story, it was therapy. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, described myths as mirrors of the collective unconscious, symbols that repeat across time because they represent universal truths. La Llorona, in this sense, is a manifestation of the dark mother archetype, the nurturing figure who, when broken by pain, turns into something destructive. But she is also the wounded woman, a symbol of suppressed emotion, silenced voices, and societal judgment upon women. Modern scholars argue that La Llorona's punishment reflects patriarchal fear of women who disobey, who grieve too loudly, who refuse to fade quietly into the background. Her eternal weeping becomes rebellion, a sound that refuses to be silenced. From a psychological perspective, stories like La Llorona's also serve a practical purpose. They teach survival through fear. In earlier centuries, families living near rivers used the story to warn children against wandering near dangerous waters. But the lesson went deeper. It taught obedience, respect for nature, and awareness of consequences. Fear, in this sense, became protection, and La Llorona, though tragic, became a guardian of morality and safety. Even today, her story plays this dual role, a tale of horror that also guides behavior, a myth that both frightens and reserves. In the end, what makes La Llorona powerful is not just her cry, but the fact that millions of people know it. When a mother in Oaxaca warns her child not to go near the river, when a grandmother in Texas recalls hearing a cry outside her window, when a musician sings her name on stage in Mexico City, they are all part of the same story. A story that connects generations, languages, and lives. In an age where traditions fade and technology replaces memory, La Llorona remains a voice that refuses to be erased. Perhaps that is her greatest power, to remind us that even the darkest stories have meaning, and that every cry, no matter how ancient, still deserves to be heard. But what happens when people claim to hear her for real? When the legend steps out of the story and into the night? Every legend begins as a story, but some stories refuse to stay on the page. Across Mexico, Central America, and the American Southwest, thousands claim they've heard her cry, seen her figure near rivers, bridges, or roads at night. To them, La Llorona is not folklore. She is real, and she's still out there. One of the earliest documented encounters comes from New Mexico's Rio Grande Valley in the 1930s. A group of villagers returning home late one evening reported hearing a woman's sobs echoing through the canyon. At first, they assumed it was someone in distress, perhaps an injured traveler. But as they approached the riverbank, the air grew colder. The crying grew louder, yet no one was there. Their lanterns revealed only fog swirling above the water's surface. Moments later, one man swore he saw a white figure gliding over the water, her hair floating behind her like dark smoke. She turned, her face pale and hollow, and then, with a scream that split the night, she vanished beneath the current. The men ran. When they returned at dawn, the ground near the river showed no footprints. Only a single child's shoe was found, half buried in the mud. In San Antonio, Texas, a story has been told for generations of La Llorona of Zarzamora Street. Residents claim that on moonless nights, a woman in a soaked white gown walks the river's edge near the old bridge. Her cries, "Ay, Mis Hios," echo through the narrow streets. One truck driver in 1957 recounted that he stopped to help what he thought was a stranded woman. She appeared to be weeping, her long hair covering her face. When he stepped closer, she lifted her head, and he saw eyes as black as the river behind her. Before he could move, she let out a scream so piercing his headlights flickered, and when they came back on, she was gone. Locals still warn travelers not to stop if they hear crying near that bridge, because sometimes what sounds like a woman in pain is something else entirely. In Guanajuato, Mexico, a region rich with ghostly legends, a family living in an old hacienda claims to have encountered La Llorona multiple times. In 1991, the family's matriarch, Dona Maria, woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of crying. At first, she assumed it was her granddaughter. But when she entered the girl's room, the child was fast asleep. The crying grew louder, this time coming from outside the window. Dona Maria opened the curtains and froze. There, standing at the edge of their garden well, was a woman dressed entirely in white, her hair soaked and tangled, her face blurred, as if covered by mist. Dona Maria whispered a prayer, and the woman turned slowly, pointing toward the well. When the family investigated the next morning, they discovered an old wooden toy, a small carved horse, floating in the water. The toy had belonged to Maria's son, who had drowned decades earlier. Even today, reports continue to surface from Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and even California. Paranormal investigators have recorded strange weeping sounds near rivers. Drivers have reported figures darting across roads. In some cases, entire groups claim to have heard her. In Albuquerque, police officers once responded to a 911 call describing a woman screaming for her children near the Rio Grande Bridge. When they arrived, the area was empty, but both officers later reported hearing a wailing unlike anything human. One officer, interviewed off-record, said, "It was like every mother's sorrow in one voice. It went through your bones." Even skeptics who investigate these events admit one thing: the recordings captured during these nights often contain sounds that defy explanation. Here we explores how a centuries-old legend found new life in movies, music, art, and popular culture, transforming from a local myth into a universal ghost story. Cinema has always been drawn to fear, and few legends capture sorrow and horror as beautifully as La Llorona. The first known film adaptation appeared in 1933, titled La Llorona, directed by Ramon Peon. It was one of Mexico's earliest horror films. Shot in black and white, it portrayed the tragic transformation of a mother into the wailing spirit. Audiences were captivated, not by the monster, but by the emotion. It wasn't just a ghost story, it was human tragedy rendered in shadows and sound. Since then, countless filmmakers have revisited her story, from La Maldición de La Llorona, The Curse of the Crying Woman, 1961, to The Curse of La Llorona, 2019, produced by James Wan within the Conjuring universe. Each version reimagined her in new forms, sometimes a vengeful spirit, sometimes a protective mother, sometimes both. In Guatemala's award-winning 2019 film La Llorona by Jero Bustamante, the legend was reborn as political allegory. There, La Llorona becomes the voice of justice, a haunting reminder of crimes buried during the Guatemalan Civil War. It was no longer about one woman's grief, but about a nation's unspoken pain. Beyond film, her voice echoes through music. Traditional Mexican ballads known as canciones de la Llorona have been sung for over a century, blending folklore and poetry. The most famous rendition, La Llorona, became part of the Mexican cultural songbook, performed by icons like Shavila Vargas, Lila Downs, and Natalia Lafourcade. Sound cue, slow guitar strum, faint female vocal humming, Ida me, Llorona. Each performance carries the same sorrowful refrain, not just fear, but longing. Her lament transforms from a curse into a cry for love, forgiveness, and memory. In art, she has appeared in murals, tattoos, children's books, and religious imagery, sometimes as a ghost, sometimes as a saint, forever caught between redemption and damnation. For many, she symbolizes both punishment and compassion, a mother's love turned eternal. In the 20th and 21st centuries, La Llorona's legend spread beyond Latin America, thanks to migration, storytelling, and the digital age. Latino families in the United States passed the tale to their children as a moral warning, just as their ancestors did. But soon, English-speaking audiences discovered her too. She began to appear in American television shows, comic books, podcasts, and YouTube documentaries. Series like Supernatural, Grimm, and The X-Files have featured versions of her myth. Paranormal YouTubers and ghost hunters explore crying woman locations across the Southwest. TikTok storytellers retell her legend to millions of new viewers. The digital era didn't silence her. It amplified her cry, spreading it far beyond the rivers of Mexico into the glowing screens of a global audience. As the legend traveled, she took on new meanings. In Puerto Rico, she became La Mujer que Llora, the woman who warns of storms. In Venezuela, she is seen as a cursed spirit haunting roadsides. In the Philippines, folklore scholars found strikingly similar stories. A grieving mother searching for her lost children, haunting rivers and lakes. Across cultures, she reflects the same emotional truth, love, loss, and consequence. This universality makes her more than a local myth. She becomes a mirror for all humanity, a voice crying through time about what happens when sorrow goes unanswered. Some anthropologists even call her the universal mother of mourning. She represents the collective grief of humanity, a symbol that every culture can understand. Why does La Llorona endure while other legends fade? Perhaps because she touches something timeless. Every generation experiences grief, regret, and longing. Every person knows what it means to lose something precious. La Llorona's story endures because it evolves, adapting to new times, yet always carrying the same cry. Filmmakers modernize her image, musicians reinterpret her pain, and digital creators resurrect her myth through new media. But through every retelling, one truth remains. No matter how much the world changes, people still listen for the sound of her tears. Scholars continue to study her legend not only as a ghost story, but as a reflection of culture, gender, and identity. Dr. Ana Castillo describes La Llorona as a spiritual survivor, a woman whose sorrow becomes strength. Others, like Gloria Anzaldúa, interpret her as a feminist icon, a woman punished by society, yet defiant in her haunting. To some, she represents the colonized soul silenced, but not erased. To others, she is a sacred warning, a reminder that love, when twisted by jealousy or rage, can destroy everything. And yet, her voice continues to call. From ancient Mexico to Hollywood screens, from whispered prayers to viral videos, La Llorona has transcended her origins. She is no longer just a spirit of one river or one people. She is an idea, a timeless echo that humanity cannot forget. Even now, as we sit in the safety of our homes, thousands of miles from the rivers where she first cried, the sound of her story still reaches us. And in the quiet moments when the wind moves just right, when the night feels too still, we might wonder, is that the sound of water? Or is someone weeping? Every legend begins somewhere. Every ghost once had a life. And behind La Llorona's weeping shadow lies the faint memory of a real woman, one whose story, though obscured by time, may have inspired centuries of fear and empathy. 4 generations, scholars, folklorists, and storytellers have searched for her. They've scoured records, traced oral histories, and compared myths from region to region. And while the truth remains elusive, certain clues bring her closer to reality. The earliest written versions of La Llorona's tale date back to 16th century colonial Mexico, a time of conquest, chaos, and transformation. Spanish chroniclers described a mysterious woman who appeared in Mexico Tenochtitlan before its fall to the Spanish in 1521. She wandered the streets at night, crying, "My children, we are about to perish." To the Aztecs, she was a spirit called Cihuacotl, the serpent woman, a goddess who wept for her lost children, the Aztec people, foretelling destruction. When the Spaniards arrived, her image merged with Catholic and European ghost lore. The indigenous goddess became a mortal woman punished for her sins, doomed to wander for eternity. Over time, this blend of indigenous prophecy, Catholic morality, and colonial trauma gave birth to the La Llorona we know today. Her cry was no longer just about lost children, it was the cry of an entire civilization watching its world vanish. Many researchers believe the legend may have originated with a real woman, a mestiza named Maria, who lived along the valleys near present-day Mexico City in the late 1500s. Historical fragments suggest Maria was deeply in love with a Spanish nobleman. But the relationship was forbidden. She was of indigenous descent, and he of European blood. Their affair, according to oral records, produced 2 children. When the nobleman abandoned her to marry a Spanish woman of status, Maria's despair turned to madness. One stormy night, in a fit of grief and fury, she took her children to the river and drowned them, only to realize, in the silent aftermath, what she had done. Overcome with horror, she threw herself into the same waters. When her body was found days later, villagers claimed they could still hear her cries at dusk. And from that night on, the river was never silent again. Whether this story was true or not, no one can say. But it spread, told in whispers through villages, carried on the lips of mothers and grandmothers. Maria became La Llorona, the eternal mother in mourning. Over centuries, her tale absorbed countless variations. In some, she is a victim betrayed and broken. In others, a monster cursed for her crime. Yet the emotional truth remained the same, a mother's love and loss intertwined with guilt. Historians believe this constant retelling allowed each generation to reshape the legend according to its fears and hopes. During colonial rule, she was a warning against disobedience. During revolutions, she symbolized national suffering. In modern times, she represents grief itself, timeless, human, and universal. In that sense, La Llorona is both history and echo, the voice of every person who has ever lost something precious and can't let go. Legends survive not because they are true, but because they speak a truth we all recognize. La Llorona endures because she reminds us of consequence, compassion, and emotion. She warns us that pain denied becomes haunting, that love twisted by jealousy can destroy, that guilt unhealed can echo forever. Her story has guided parents, frightened children, inspired poets, and fascinated filmmakers. But more importantly, it has given voice to generations who felt unseen, the poor, the silenced, the sorrowful. To listen to her cry is to remember that even in grief, there is humanity. She teaches that pain, when ignored, becomes legend. And perhaps that's why she still walks. Today, people continue to report sightings not as horror, but as connection. In Mexico City, candlelight vigils are sometimes held along rivers on All Souls' Day, not to ward her off, but to honor her story. Mothers bring flowers for their own lost children. Families whisper prayers. Musicians play her songs slow, mournful, reverent. They no longer see her only as a monster. They see her as a reflection, a reminder of how fragile life, love, and forgiveness can be. If you travel through rural Mexico on a still night, you may still hear it, a faint sound beneath the wind. Some say it's only the water. Others know better. They'll tell you, don't go too close to the river after dark. That's where she cries. Whether myth or memory, she endures, a voice that refuses to fade. La Llorona is not simply a ghost. She is history, pain, motherhood, and loss woven together in a single endless cry. And as long as rivers flow through the earth, as long as humans love and lose, her voice will remain. It is said that on certain nights, when the moon is thin and the air still, her voice drifts over the waters, not to frighten, but to remind. A whisper carried across centuries, of a mother's sorrow, a civilization's fall, and the fragile line between the living and the dead. Whether you believe in her or not, remember this: legends endure because they carry the emotions we cannot name. And perhaps, when we hear her cry, what we truly hear is ourselves. I am La Llorona, the woman who weeps. And as long as hearts can break, my voice will never die.